All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of The Focus. I am the host, Andy Steele, and we're going to be talking about something a little unique, a little different tonight, but it pertains to our mission here at AE911Truth regarding the controlled demolitions of the three towers in New York that day. I know some people are more careful and saying alleged and all that stuff. I have seen enough evidence myself to know these buildings were brought down in controlled demolitions, and we're going to be bringing you the guys who have the weight and the power and their credentials to be able to make that case this evening and moving forward, of course. But we're going to be talking about a building code, ASCE 7623. We've got an excellent presentation by this gentleman, of course, Roland Angle. He is the chairman of AE911Truth. He graduated from the University of California, Berkeley with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. And let me bring the right person in. And he served in the U.S. Army Special Forces, where he was trained in the use of explosives. He became a licensed civil engineer in California, and he's got 50 years of engineering experience, which has included designing and testing blast-hardened missile launch facilities and designing U.S. naval explosive containers, harbor terminal facilities, earth foundation systems, and hydraulic systems. He's going to be joined tonight by Dick Lowman, who received a BS CE and an MSCE from the University of Washington in 1971 and 72. His master's degree is focused on water and wastewater management, and his career has spanned a wide spectrum of general civil engineering projects and general engineering construction. He's been formally licensed in Washington, California, Alaska, and Hawaii, and now he's a volunteer with AE911Truth Project Due Diligence, and they are joined, of course, by Mike Herzig. Mike has practiced civil engineering for 42 years in public works. In his career, he did street drainage and wastewater design and construction management. He supervised the operation of the Hydraulic Research Lab, doing modeling and calibration of proposed water structures. He also studied failures to determine corrections from sinkholes, earthquakes, floods, and landslides. He supervised engineers doing transportation facility design and plan review, and developed standards and research products for use or denied use within the city of, I think it was Los Angeles. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. He's a lifetime member of the ASCE, and of course, he's a volunteer with Project Due Diligence. We're not going to let these guys get away without helping us out. So I'm going to bring up Roland's presentation, and then he's going to have the floor, and then we're going to have an excellent discussion about this issue afterwards. Roland, take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, Andy, for that introduction, and thanks, Mike and Dick, for joining us today. I know this is a matter that is not getting any attention in the civil engineering field or the engineering field in general, as far as I know. And that's very alarming, given that it has such far-reaching potential effects. And what's been going on behind the scenes is that we've been contesting the NIST version of the collapse of Building 7. I think that's pretty well known throughout the general public. The fact that the NIST explanation of Building 7 has not been accepted, and there are many questions about it, and NIST and their accomplices are still busily presenting information to reinforce their notion, their theory of how Building 7 came down, and they're completely refusing to respond to any inquiry that points out the problems with their analysis. So that's been going on since, well, at least since 2010. We have taken this into court. We've asked them to correct their reports and respond to our criticisms and the points that we're making about why their theory doesn't work. And they have refused to respond. We had to take them into court. The courts have acted to protect NIST by ruling that we have no standing to question their reports, even though we represent 3,600 practicing building professionals that have signed our petition calling for a new investigation and supporting our position. And NIST is simply refusing to acknowledge that we even exist. And the problem lies with the fact that NIST has drawn the ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineers, and their Structural Engineering Institute into this picture, and they are now busily, quite methodically over time, coming up with documentation that supports their position and completely ignores the issues that we have raised. So one of the ways that this is happening is in the development of new standards for building construction. This is a process that goes on all the time, and the engineering profession has a way of introducing new standards into the field, and they typically have an issue which they form a committee to meet, and according to their own standards, they're supposed to invite all interested parties to any discussion regarding new standards or new building codes. And this is a method that's been set up by the American National Standards Institute, which is sort of a watchdog agency that makes sure that people don't come in with additions and new codes that don't have any foundation in reality, or may be slanted to benefit that particular agency. So if you're going to develop a new standard, the idea is that you invite people that could be affected by that, and you have a back and forth discussion about that new proposal, and you work out any differences amongst the parties that may have different interests. Now, ASCE and NIST know that we've been contesting their theory about how Building 7 came down, and they know that. They've known that for the last 15 years. And yet they put together this committee, and this committee is dominated by people who worked on the NIST report. There are 7 members on this committee that worked on the NIST report that describes their version of how the building came down. Now, those people are very aware of the fact that we have differences with their analysis. And so when they set up a committee to propose a new standard, they had an ethical and legal commitment, according to their agreement with ANSI, to invite all parties to the discussion, and they did not invite us. We didn't hear about it until they had already finished the standard and released it to the public. NIST issued a press release in June of last year, June 6th, and they announced that this new building standard was ready, and it was going to pave the way for collapse-resistant structures. And then they revealed that they had set up this committee with ASCE, and they had been working on this for years without notifying us at all. So this is an ethical issue for our, first and foremost, it's an ethical issue for our profession, because we have here the oldest and most prestigious engineering profession in the country engaged in deceitful action to come up with a standard to verify a claim that they worked on hand in hand with NIST. So I'm going to run through these brief slides here, and then we can sort of kick this around afterwards and see what this means for our profession and what we need to do about it. So the title of this presentation is False Technical Information from 9/11 is Degrading the Engineering Profession. And we note that ASCE and the SEI committee recommends Standard 7623 to prevent disproportionate collapse based on events that never happened. In other words, their whole analysis is based upon the NIST report of how Building 7 collapsed on 9/11. Okay, so how do we get to the next slide here? Oh, I do this. Okay. So the National Institute of Standards and Technology recommended changes to building codes based on the claim that World Trade Center Building 7 collapsed due to office fires on 9/11 and on the collapse of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma in 1995. And they are going to put forward this standard as a way of preventing such future events from happening, which of course is the whole point of building codes, protecting public safety. So now we're going to go to a NIST video that explains their position on the need for this new standards based upon the Building 7 collapse.
New York City, 2001. No tall building had ever collapsed primarily due to fire. But that's exactly what investigators believe happened to the 47-story World Trade Center Building 7 on September 11th. According to a 3-year comprehensive building and fire safety investigation just completed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires. We really have a new kind of progressive collapse that we have discovered here, which is a fire-induced progressive collapse. And in fact, we have shown for the first time that fire can induce a progressive collapse.
NIST used detailed data describing the building and its contents to create the most complex computer simulation of a structure collapse ever made. Falling debris from Tower 1 started fires on 10 floors in Building 7. A break in the city water main from the collapse of the towers disabled sprinklers in the lower half of WTC 7, allowing fires on those floors to burn for 7 hours. The NIST computer model was validated with evidence from videos, photos, witness accounts, and other data. It shows that heat from fires expanded long support beams, causing connections and floors to fail.
So you look at the floors failing here, and eventually this column 79 is going to buckle, it fails, and then the entire vertical progression takes place.
The buckled column caused additional collapsed floors and falling debris that removed support from adjacent interior columns. A chain reaction then caused other interior columns to fail in quick succession. The outside shell of the building fell. The NIST team found no evidence that explosives were involved in the collapse.
And our analysis showed that even the smallest explosive charge that was capable of bringing down the critical column in the building, had it occurred, we would have seen sound levels of 120 to 130 decibels about a half a mile away. That would have been an incredibly loud sound, and that sound was not picked up by any of the videos or witnesses that we have talked to.
The team found that World Trade Center 7's design was generally consistent with the relevant building codes when it was built.
Our high-rise buildings in this country are very, very safe. Having a collapse of this nature is a very rare event.
Nevertheless, to ensure that buildings do not collapse in fires, even when sprinklers fail or are not present, the NIST team urges reevaluation of the fire performance of structures with long-span floors and other design elements similar to WTC 7. The team's report also calls for stronger codes, standards, and practices so that other buildings don't suffer the same fate.
So there you have a concise explanation from NIST that completely ignores the evidence of what actually caused Building 7 to collapse. We paid the University of Alaska at Fairbanks to perform a study on Building 7 for us, and that report was conducted by the structural engineering head of the department there, Leroy Halsey, and his graduate students. And that study took 4 years, and they released their report in 2020. And their conclusion was that the buildings could not have collapsed due to office fires. And the only way that you could get the building to behave in the manner in which it's seen to fail is by removing all 82 columns in the building at the same time in the lower part of the building over an 8-floor span. So that's what we're coming up with. We're saying, well, we've got an academic report here, and this is what it says. It doesn't say, it looks at the NIST report, it tries to replicate it, can't replicate it, makes every effort to replicate it using the NIST inputs, couldn't do it. And yet this is being ignored. It's being ignored in the engineering profession, and the ASCE and the other major engineering organizations like the Structural Engineering Associations and the National Alliance of Forensic Engineers have all jumped on board with ASCE, and they're pretending that this analysis that NIST put forward, by the way, with input from their contractors, many of whom were associated and affiliated with the American Society of Civil Engineers. So this is a conflict of interest. We have an event here that has not been explained. We've made every effort to bring our information to the engineering profession. In fact, we've made presentations before many ASCE chapters and national and NIST, National Society of Professional Engineers, SEA. We've made these presentations to more than 1,000 engineers. They all agree with us unanimously that the NIST report doesn't stand and it needs to be redone. So the fact that they are now coming out with standards that are based upon this false narrative is harmful to the proficiency of our profession. We can't be training engineers and pretending that this theory somehow works when in fact it doesn't. If we act upon that information, we're going to go down a wrong road. This just lays out what the University of Alaska Fairbanks report came up with, the authors, and the objective was to rule out scenarios that couldn't cause collapse, which they did. They said office fires couldn't cause this building to come down in this way. And this just quotes from that study. Principal conclusion: fire did not cause the collapse of World Trade Center 7 on 9/11, contrary to the conclusions of NIST and private engineering firms that studied the collapse. Fires could not have caused weakening or displacement of structural members capable of initiating any of the hypothetical local failures alleged to have triggered the total collapse of the building. Nor could any local failures, even if they had occurred, have triggered a sequence of events that were observed in the actual event. So we filed a request for correction, which is a maneuver that is allowed under the law to any government agency that issues a report. If you have an issue with the accuracy of that report, you can file a request for them to correct it. And we laid that out to them very carefully, and they basically did not respond in any meaningful way. They waited till the last minute, and then they just file a paper that's reiterated what they had said in their original report without addressing any of our concerns. So we challenged that, and we filed a complaint with the district court in Washington, D.C., asking the American Society of Civil Engineers to join the complaint, because we pointed out to the ASCE, hey, this is an event that affects our entire profession, and as one of the leading representatives of our profession, you have an interest in this. You don't want the government proclaiming incidents that have no foundation in reality that affect our profession and our ability to provide public safety for the public. However, ASCE didn't even respond to our request. They wouldn't answer our mail. They just acted as if we didn't exist. Then the court, ruling on the facts of the matter, without ruling on the facts of the matter, simply said that we didn't have standing. Now, if ASCE had joined our lawsuit, it would have been much more difficult for the court to claim that we had no standing. But since we are not an official professional organization representing the engineering community like ASCE is and has been for the past 170 years, they could easily say that we had no standing. Couldn't have done that, I don't believe, if ASCE had joined our complaint in the courts. So then these developments and evidence are a disturbing trend that's taking place within our profession. What we have is the U.S. government directing research and information through the leadership of the engineering profession. And the purpose of this is to control and cover up evidence of state crimes against democracy, which is what the collapse of Building 7 and the Twin Towers were on 9/11. The combination of the state and professional collusion is a hallmark of what we call corporatism or fascism, where you have private industry and corporate interests combining with the government to dictate a narrative in spite of the best interest of the public, in this case, the safety of people using buildings. So that is a brief synopsis of what's going on behind the scenes in our profession. And of course, our professional organizations are refusing to acknowledge that this controversy even exists by refusing to respond to any of our inquiries, in spite of the fact that we know that when we take this information to the rank and file engineers across the country, they agree with us. If you look at the UAF study of Building 7 and its failure and compare it to NIST's report, the NIST report doesn't pass muster. So now we're at the stage where they're going to incorporate these falsehoods and this false narrative into standards for building construction. And this is the beginning of the growth of a cancer of misinformation and disinformation in our professional standards. And we cannot stand by and allow that to happen. So leaving at that, I'd like to ask Mike, I know you read this new standard 7623 and went through it carefully, and tell us what you found.
Oh, thanks, Roland. I did read this back in July and August, and the title of the standards book is Standard for Mitigation of Disproportionate Collapse Potential in Buildings and Other Structures. What I find is there's nothing wrong with the standard that they came up with. I mean, it's very well done professionally. However, in the introduction, it essentially is either mistakenly, sloppily written or deceptively written to let you think that this was a standard developed by the ANSI requirements. Now, ASCE does have has gone through some ANSI training, and they use their information to develop this standard, but it's written in a way that says we used that, where they essentially say that we used everybody that has an interest in this standard. And in finding out that this thing came out, they did not include our viewpoint, the architects and engineers viewpoint. But I had an English teacher read the information in the publication information and ask him what it said. And he says, well, looks like it followed that ASCE standard. And I said, well, take a look again, read it a little more carefully and think about what the subject matter is and the verbs. And it turns out that, okay, they don't say that they followed that standard, but they let you think that they did by the way they did it. And I could do it by going through the details of it and point that out. But anyway, that's the biggest part. The other thing about the standard that I consider is it adds another layer of criteria necessary to design structures, considering the risks, what type of loadings they're going to have. There may be other types of loadings, and making sure you check the structure and possibly show what happens if you remove certain parts of the structure to make sure that the structure does not collapse into a global collapse or a partial collapse. Disproportionate is the word they use. It was also thought that progressive collapse was another term, but that was more in terms of what happens in the construction actual collapse. But disproportionate was decided to be used in the design area to test out various scenarios to make sure that a building does not, or other structure doesn't collapse if it's exposed to the loads that they decide are supposed to be applied to whatever you're designing. That's kind of a nutshell, but you can ask more questions if you have any.
So in other words, Mike, there's nothing wrong with the application of the scientific principles that they used in coming up with the standard, right?
No, but when you ask that question in that sense, there's another part of it, and all of the important stuff is right in the beginning of the standard. Standard itself holds up very well and can be applied if somebody chooses or is required to use it. But the ASCE takes no responsibility. The SEI, the Structural Engineering Institute of ASCE, does not take any responsibility for anything that might be wrong in the standard. That the responsibility is laid on the user of the standard, in other words, the design engineer. So it's an interesting way of putting things.
All right, Dick, can I ask you what your sort of top of the head take on all this is? What are your concerns?
Yeah, basically, I'm following you and Mike, and I have no dispute with anything what you're saying. What I've seen that really disturbs me is the trajectory that I'm seeing the engineering profession follow. Because the engineering profession, all engineering societies that I'm aware of follow a ethical code. And with ASCE, it's first and foremost, protect the health, safety, welfare of the public, something like that. And all codes pretty much follow that. And in the past, the engineering community has done an excellent job in that. And I don't want to lead this discussion elsewhere, but I want to point out that controversial issues have happened in the past, where some people believe the government, some people believe the media, some people don't. And issues like the assassinations of JFK, MLK, USS Liberty, Tonkin Gulf, TWA 800. You can look at those and form your own opinions whether those are good or bad. What we've been told is good and bad. But the engineering profession has stayed above that. They don't get involved in that kind of stuff. In the past, they haven't. And good examples that I've considered in the past is there was a tragic, catastrophic collapse of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in 1940, I think. And the engineering profession stepped up, reviewed the damage, analyzed it, and came to a consensus opinion that made the world a better place now. And likewise, later on, there was the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Kansas City. That was a terrible collapse, killed a lot of people, and injured a lot of people. And again, the engineering community stepped up, looked at the evidence, formed a consensus opinion, and the world's a better place now because that type of collapse isn't going to happen again, probably. But now we have the government entering the picture. And going back to the Oklahoma City collapse, which NIST is citing as a progressive collapse. In that case, the engineering profession, for whatever reason, stayed in the background and didn't look at the official story. And giving them credit, ASCE tried to go on site, but they were prevented from going on site. But what is worrisome is when they were denied access to the site and they were told that this is a story, they didn't speak up. The engineering profession stood back and said, okay. And then we went to, later on, World Trade Center. The engineering profession took a kind of a step backwards, and they're, frankly, involved in the cover-up. And that brings us up to what we're talking about here, 7623, the code change. We actually have the engineering profession arguably being used by a public agency to put forth a code giving the impression that ASCE initiated this, and they didn't. NIST initiated it. And one thing that hasn't come up on this program yet today, I think needs to be brought out, is that NIST, National Institute of Technology Standards, they're a political agency. They're not independent in any sense of the word. They're a branch of the Department of Commerce, and they're answerable to the administration. And arguably, they could be said to be a tool of the administration. And so NIST is, for whatever reason, saying that Oklahoma City was a progressive collapse and Building 7 was a progressive collapse in spite of all the evidence. The evidence, just to briefly go through it, Oklahoma City, there was a truck bomb, as everybody knows. And the official explanation is a truck bomb totally destroyed the building via progressive collapse, but that didn't happen, or the evidence doesn't support that. The blast debris was forced outward from the building instead of inward, as a truck bomb would do. The blast was looked at by a explosive demolition expert, General Parton, a highly qualified individual, and he said, no way could this have happened. And he was denied access to the site. And subsequently, the U.S. Air Force did testing. They built a structure and tested it with a truck bomb, similar to what the authorities are stating, and the U.S. Air Force said can't happen. And yet, coming to the end, we have NIST saying, well, it's just progressive collapse. They're ignoring all the evidence of multiple explosions, the seismic information. It's being ignored, and essentially NIST is saying, take our word for it. We have no calculations. There's no analysis proving it. Just take our word for it. It's progressive collapse. And the same thing with Building 7, as you have covered very well. I mean, there's more than enough evidence that it's not progressive collapse. And yet, we have NIST saying it's progressive collapse, but we're not going to share the calculations with you. And what was that letter we got back from NIST when we asked for the calculations, Roland? They said it was against national security to release their analysis.
A threat to public safety.
Threat to public safety. If they were to release the analysis showing why they believe it's progressive collapse. So in both cases, Oklahoma City, World Trade Center 7, just believe us. We won't tell you why or how. We won't defend it in any way, but just believe us, and that's the way it's going to be. And now we're coming into the 7623. And it bothers me that NIST approached ASCE and said, we want this, and we want it to say this. And NIST packed the team with NIST affiliated people. I don't know if they were employees or what, but they were affiliated with NIST. And then the team was smart enough not to bring up the direct pointing to the Oklahoma City or World Trade Center 7. That's not specifically addressed in 7623, because then if it was, it could be subject to peer review. But there's a couple of indirect references in there to a couple of obscure NIST documents that do mention them, but it's not in there. And now NIST, after the fact, is saying, well, this proves that we're right. It doesn't prove anything. There's nothing in there that says that. There's been no analysis of progressive collapse. So that's the bottom line of where it disturbs me is we're on a bad trajectory here. Where arguably we have a political agency, politically driven agency, now using ASCE as a tool to forward their agenda. And I guess that's it. That's all I have to say.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Dick. I think that's a very, thoughtful and historical look at what's happening, what's happened in the past, what's happening now, and where this would lead us in the future. And I want to point out that we are still contesting the NIST report in the courts. We're getting ready to, it's gone up to the appellate court in the District of Columbia. We had an appeal to the entire court there, and they're still denying us standing. So the court is refusing to look at the actual evidence itself and simply saying that we're a bunch of people who, even though we're 3,600 architects and engineers, we're people that don't have any standing to question this matter, even though it affects our profession. So we're going to take that to the Supreme Court. We're going to have a filing next month, and hopefully the Supreme Court will take it up. But the reason why we're doing that, one of the big reasons, is because the lower court ruled in our particular case. They made a more general ruling that said that, well, even though agencies have a duty to publish reports on their findings, they don't have to tell the truth. The findings don't have to be accurate. They don't have to stand up to any kind of peer review. They simply have to issue a report, and the report can say anything. So this affects everybody in the United States that is affected by government agencies, and we all are. So essentially, they've taken a situation which is bad enough in itself, and now they're going to use that as a standard for ruling on any other matter where a government agency is involved and being called onto the carpet by the public or anyone else who disputes their findings. So this is a perfect example of how something in our profession, which affects us directly, also affects the wider public. If they enshrine this into law, then every government agency has been given carte blanche not to address any issue of any substance in any truthful manner. So that's where we are. This is not going to change in our profession until we get some change in the leadership of our organizations, people that are willing to address the evidence. And that's what we're pushing for. And we ask all of our engineering colleagues, anyone connected with the engineering profession that's aware of this. And of course, NIST and ASCE are doing their very best to make sure that nobody hears about this. But those of us who do have a duty to respond and either get our leadership to change its position or change our leadership. That's in our best interest, and that's in the interest of our profession serving the community, as we have historically. And as you pointed out, Dick, in the past, when you had a leadership that was responsive, then you had results from these catastrophes that actually fixed the problem. We have a situation now in which our leadership is refusing to even address the problem, and in fact was part of constructing this false narrative. So that is a very, very, very distressing and troubling aspect of what's going on in our profession and in our society today.
Now, I'm the non-engineer here. I just want to ask you guys, because you guys are more well-versed on ASCE 7623 than I am. I've heard somewhere on a TV show somebody was called an answer to a question nobody asked. In this particular case, is this an answer to a problem that doesn't exist? Because we're basing it on this fantasy that Building 7 was a progressive collapse. There was no water available, as you heard Shyam Sunder say, although there's evidence to show that that's not true. Is this an answer to a problem that doesn't exist, in your opinion?
I'll go ahead. In reading the code, it just adds another layer of design costs as well as construction costs if you beef up materials. Right now, the code has no clout because it hasn't been adopted by any government agency. That doesn't mean they're not going to try to get that adopted, but it creates another engineering profession, actually, to just look at designs as it relates to disproportionate collapse. It is, in my mind, something created because they said that we need to have some code changes as a result of 9/11, and that wasn't happening. So this one they can look at and say, well, we did come up with this, that because of those collapses, progressive collapses, we do have a code now where the engineers are going to look at it in that light.
This leads to my next question, because okay, we have to make changes to the code now because NIST needs to do CYA on their report, and we can't let the plebes know that this was a controlled demolition. Will this standard put any further burdens on the construction industry? And do you think it's justified?
Right now, it's just voluntary. I mean, if a client agrees to go along with it, and they have to figure out, I think it goes back to loading. What kind of loads do you design these elements of the structure for? And are we going to have to design for blasts? That's pretty much what it is. Usually you're dealing with earthquake, seismic, wind, and vibrations and things like that, and as well as the loads that the building is supposed to carry within it, and the dead load of the building structure itself. So anyway, to me, you can't, how do you know how to design a building for disproportionate collapse when you don't know where the load is coming from? The blast could be anywhere.
Well, it seems to me, because you have half this country is on the right, half this country is on the left. People on the right tend to not support any new regulations that put any kind of burden on American business more than what's needed or justified. And so right now it seems like it's voluntary. Things always start off as voluntary before more people adopt them, and it just becomes expected, and then it's required. And if we're putting any burden on American business, on the construction industry, based off of 9/11, it's further justification for looking at the actual facts of that day. And we have well documented over the years that the NIST report doesn't hold water. I mean, just even an article we published a couple of years ago where you have photographic evidence showing that the fires were out in the area of collapse initiation. It completely undermines the entire story that NIST has given us about these raging fires causing these beams to expand and push the girder off at sea. So it further justifies in people's pocketbooks, big businesses' pocketbooks, why we need to re-examine this. And I can see why this would be infuriating for you guys as engineers, because I'm almost thinking that we should title this episode The Invisible Men. Because when the system, whatever you want to call it, the powers that be, when they want to try to squash any dissent, the first thing that they do is they pretend that you are irrelevant, that you do not exist. And because you guys are interested parties in this building code, you were not even invited to give your input on the entire situation. And that is a normal part of the process, is it not?
Absolutely. That's enshrined in the practices and the protocols of the engineering profession. That's the way we operate.
Right. But they pretend that you aren't there. Go ahead.
What I get from this, though, is ASCE members could benefit substantially by creating another level of engineering review that goes into design of a building or another structure. So as a contractor or developer, they're not going to want to bear the cost of any of that. You're correct on that.
And that's exactly why ANSI requires that all interested parties be brought to the table when new standards or codes are developed, because they want to make sure that somebody isn't in there just fattening their own market. We could come up with if we're building a certain type of structure, or we're involved in the production of certain types of equipment or materials or whatever, we could go call up a standard that requires them in the building a process, and if we don't have any opposition, get that passed, and we've just made a bunch of money for ourselves at the expense of the taxpayer.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is too, I heard somebody describing this about a completely different issue, but in terms of, why some people oppose government regulations is that it can be used as a tool to squash any competition. For instance, let's say that me and Roland both have an engineering company, which would be really strange because I'm not an engineer, but in this world I am. And Roland is coming up and competing with me. Let's say I'm the big business. I might welcome a new regulation because I can hire all the lawyers and people to do the extra paperwork, whereas if he's an up-and-comer, he may not be able to. So these things can be used to try to consolidate power for big companies. And if you are on the smaller end of this business spectrum, it wouldn't be beneficial to you. So this is another example, and this is why we're doing this show today, because a lot of times our supporters get more excited about the conspiratorial aspects of the 9/11 crime and focusing in on that. But this is a prime example of how 9/11 is continuing to affect our world today. Right now it's voluntary, but the way that these things go is that it goes from voluntary to expected and required. And this will put a burden on American business if we're basing new standards off of fantasies created by NIST for something that didn't actually happen. Because we know what really happened. It was controlled demolition. Guys, your final thoughts on all of this?
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I think you're right on there, Andy, because there again, if I were to read through that code a few times, I could become an expert and then hire myself out to that additional element of the design. So, but I don't know where it's going to go with this one. It could go just the way you're saying. But it's also satisfying what NIST probably had to do is come up with some code revisions that essentially support that we're doing something about it.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll tell you what, if you are an engineer out there who has been on the fence about supporting our mission, saying, oh my God, it was over 20 years ago, who cares? Well, this is an exact reason why you should care, because this could be on your doorstep. This could affect your business. It is another reason why you need to rethink 9/11, investigate, learn the facts, and decide for yourself. If you think that we have a case, then certainly vocalize your support for us, because this is incredibly important. We're making decisions now based off of the big lie, which we have been doing in other spectrums of American life, politically and civil liberties wise and geopolitically and all of that. But now this is affecting the engineering profession, who we reach out to on a constant basis. So you need to know the facts of these building collapses and form an opinion on this that's educated and looks at all of the facts, no matter where they lead. Guys, thank you so much for keeping your eye on the ball with these matters, with these points. I remember, when I first heard, we're going to cover a building code, I said, well, I don't know if that'll be that interesting, but I'll tell you what, it is absolutely interesting given this point that is being made today. So share this around if you are a supporter, especially with engineering friends. Put the focus out there. It's the reason that we do these shows, is to reach that audience and get that groundswell of grassroots activism among the engineering profession to turn the tide on this issue. But thank you guys for doing the focus today.